I graduated early out of high school, went to work full-time, working full-time while going to school. It is good for these kids. And you know what these kids of today are? Majority of them are lazy. They don't know what work ethic is, but they know how to play video games all night. They know how to join gangs. They know how to get into trouble. Get a job and be responsible.
And I'd like to ask Senator Dickey to yield to a question about that.
No.
The senator will not yield. Senator Dotzler, you're in order.
I'm going to ask him again. I think this is very important. I would like Senator Dickey to yield to questions that I think need to be answered.
Senator Dickey, will you yield?
No.
Senator Dotzler, you're in order.
Okay. Well, that's very disappointing. I don't know what's going on. I have never experienced a floor manager refusing to yield to a question that's central to the bill. This isn't some I gotcha thing. I think it's an important point. So if you won't yield, I'd like to ask Senator Whitford to yield, Madam President.
Senator Whitford, will you yield?
No.
I mean, is this democracy? Is that what's going on? We're passing bills out of this chamber for appropriations that have no numbers in it. The public gets cut out, and now we're cutting the public out because I, as a senator, cannot ask a single question of any majority party member about a bill that affects people's lives.
Iowa Republican politicians want to solve the Reynolds workforce crisis on the literal backs of children. Senate File 542 will allow 14 and 15-year-olds to work in roofing, in excavation, in dangerous manufacturing, in the operation of saws and guillotine shears, and in demolition. Roofing, excavation, and demolition are some of the deadliest occupations for adults, to say nothing of teenagers. Roofers had the 5th highest rate of work-caused deaths in America. That fatality rate is almost 10 times higher than a typical American job. No Iowa teenager should be working in America's deadliest jobs. It jeopardizes their lives and the lives of everyone else at that work site. That is not going to make Iowa a more attractive place for workers, and it's not going to solve the Reynolds workforce crisis.
So what this measure does is it allows BOLI to impose a civil penalty of up to $10,000 for child labor law violation, even when the penalty is also paid to the U.S. Department of Labor. But what this bill does is it says, hey, there are laws on the books, and a penalty needs to be there to ensure conformity to the law. We as a Senate are saying that penalties discourage bad behavior, and I support that. These laws exist to protect children.
What we're failing to pass on to our kids is the ability and the desire and the knowledge that you sometimes need to work, and sometimes it's not fun.
Defeat this bill today and have a better discussion where we talk about the ins and outs and the opportunities to ensure kids grow up to have a world of business and hard work ready at their fingertips instead of crushing the small business they're working for.
It's my understanding then that any bill that we got comes before this body that the minority party has a question about, a part of it that can affect the people that are involved, the restaurant association, taverns, pubs, you name it, that we can't ask questions that's going to relate to their livelihood? Who do we ask? Should I go around and Senator Whitford, I know you're not going to yield, but I guess this is a hypothetical question. Should I go around and ask every individual senator in this chamber whether they can answer a question? We had a bill up earlier where the leader, the floor manager of the bill, did answer a question. I don't know what's going on. So if my fellow senators won't ask questions, I've still got these questions. What does it mean? What does food mean? I think that the fact that it says food on here doesn't stop this from occurring, that young girls could be working in a tavern. I think this amendment, a pizza is considered food. It's a meal. I go to the tavern in West Des Moines to get a meal. Guess what I order? A pizza. And a lot of times in small towns, that's the only place you can get food, a pizza. But you sit in a bar and drink, and these patrons can hit on these young girls, not only hit on them, follow them out. I had people follow my niece out of the bar and wanted to ask her questions, like, what are you doing? And she was 18. This bill says 17 and 16-year-olds. So I got real questions about this. And Madam President, if the senators won't yield to this, I need to talk to some attorneys to find out what the heck this stuff means and what are the implications. I know some of you senators in here are decent people, and I don't believe you believe in this. If we were in the majority, I would expect you to ask me questions, and no matter how hard they have been, and it's always operated this way. It's always operated this way. You yield. And I've been in here before when they've asked questions of the majority party and the person said no. Guess what the leadership did? They got them to yield. They don't have to say much. What's going on? Is this the end of democracy? It's all about totalitarianism. We're in control of everything so we can do whatever the heck we want. And the public don't need to know, and the restaurant association don't need to know, and taverns and pub owners don't need to know about their liability. So, Madam President, because nobody will answer a question, and I can't find attorneys at this time of night, I want to defer on this bill.
This bill accomplishes two main things. Parents have more input by granting permission for their children to work in certain areas that currently do not require such permission. This bill makes our youth much safer by dramatically updating our youth labor laws and eliminating many dangerous and unacceptable jobs that our youth are currently allowed to work in. It simply is providing our youth an opportunity to earn and learn at the same time frame as their classmates do while participating in sports and other fine arts. While the responsibility of having a job might be more valuable than a paycheck, the reward of the paycheck will allow these youth who want to have a job to possibly to save for a car, maybe buy a prom dress, go to a summer camp, take a date out for the weekend, and even for some, the ability to save some money so they will not be subject to the monstrous amount of debt that some will face in a few years by going to college.
I rise today in strong opposition to Senate File 542. Now, Senate Democrats agree with Senate Republicans that the Reynolds workforce crisis that is ravaging our state's economy needs solutions. This year, Senate Democrats have introduced bill after bill after bill to address the Reynolds workforce crisis, including legislation to fix our state's broken child care system, fully funding preschool, and boosting wages for Iowa workers. Senate Democrats know that everyday Iowans need a better deal, and Iowans deserve a better deal than the one that they're getting from Iowa Republicans. The fact that they're not getting a better deal is why so many young Iowans are leaving Iowa and why so many young families are choosing not to come home. Because rather than passing the common sense bills introduced by Senate Democrats, Iowa's Republican politicians have continued to pour gasoline on the culture war fire, passing bills that attack public education, attack LGBTQ Iowans, and attack the right of women to control their own bodies. These divisive bills pit Iowans against each other and make this workforce crisis worse, not better. And now, rather than actually addressing the root of the problem, Iowa Republican politicians are advancing legislation to roll back child labor protections that, as we heard, were hard-won and that protect our youngest workers from being in harm's way. Now, let's be crystal clear. Senate Democrats strongly support the right of Iowa's young adults to work and grow in safe and age-appropriate work settings. As a teenager, I worked in a variety of jobs, including using potentially dangerous equipment in lawn care, in literal life-saving situations as a lifeguard. With the right training, equipment, and legal protections, Iowa has so many opportunities for young people to work in safe, rewarding, and character-building settings, and Iowa Democrats have both benefited from and strongly support those opportunities. But Iowa Democrats know that child labor in dangerous workplace settings is a real and persistent problem in our state and our country. Earlier this year, one of the largest food sanitation companies in America was fined $1.5 million after a Department of Labor investigation found that they were illegally employing over 100 children as young as 13 years old across the Midwest, cleaning meatpacking plants and slaughterhouses. How many of you have children this age or grandchildren? How many of you would be comfortable with your child or grandchild using dangerous cleaning equipment and experiencing caustic chemical burns like some of these exploited children did? This legislation will make illegal behavior like this more common, not less, and we all know it. Senate Democrats are not worried about the good faith businesses in our state who we can trust to maintain safe workplaces. We're not worried about the grocery store or the movie theater. And after this amendment, I'm a lot less worried about the restaurants or hotels. As our founding fathers wrote in Federalist 51, if men were angels, no government would be necessary. But Senate Democrats know that not all businesses are run by angels. In fact, just this past weekend, as Iowa State lawmakers were touring a construction site in Lynn County, they saw not just unsafe workplace conditions, but at least one underage worker who, upon being asked his age, was instructed by a supervisor to respond that he was 18. By voting yes on Senate File 542 and loosening these protections, Senate Republicans will be putting more kids into dangerous workplace settings. That is what we are worried about. Republicans are going to say this bill is about giving Iowa youth more opportunities to join the workforce, but allowing kids into these potentially dangerous workplace settings shows Iowans the truth. This bill puts Iowa children in danger, allowing 14 and 15-year-olds to work in roofing, in demolition, in excavation, some of the most deadly jobs in America, poses a danger to everyone on that work site, to say nothing of its violation of federal child labor laws providing minimum protections that were enacted nearly a century ago. The Reynolds workforce crisis is real. Apparently, Senate Democrats and Republicans finally agree on that. But we cannot and should not solve this crisis on the backs of children.
I've received complaints that our child labor laws are repressive to those who want opportunity to work, who want access to the work world, to start to earn a living, to learn about what it is to have employment, to be a dutiful employee, to work hard, and to be compensated for your work. We're not discussing child labor laws today. We're discussing whether or not violation of the law should have a penalty and what that penalty should be and whether or not the state should be able to enforce outside of simply what the federal government does. So I agree, if we want to revisit what a child can do, that's a discussion we should have. I do think that more children in today's day and age could work, could engage in employment opportunities and be compensated for that. And I think too often we picture the 13-year-old and not the 17-year-old. We picture the 14-year-old that wants to do something, but not the 17-year-old that has a desire to be a butcher and has to use a bandsaw. Oh, wait, you're not 18, you can't do that yet. Anyway. We'll save that for another day and another discussion. Today we're going to discuss as to whether or not having a civil penalty imposed by the state of Oregon is a good idea or a bad idea. and whether or not the state should be able to do it on its own and not just cede control and authority to the federal government.
Thank you, Mr. President. And colleagues, this might be one of the tougher no votes I've cast this session, but most of us picture child labor laws with the mines in West Virginia and some kid 8 years old doing mining. I'm old. I'll be the first to tell you I am. I started working when I was 8 years old. 8. If I didn't like working in the grocery store my father had, I was told I could go out and pick berries or beans. Everybody did that. Now, that wasn't a discipline, and trust me, my father lost money having me work because I wasn't the world's greatest worker, but it taught you a work ethic. Now kids turn 18, and we expect them to go out with this discipline of knowing how to work, and they don't have it. Now, there's no exemption in this bill for summertime employees. And summertime is when the schools are out. And I think that that's a perfectly good time to allow kids to be employed. And that isn't in this bill. It's simply a $10,000 fine if you fail to let a kid work. And I think it's imperative that we allow kids to work and we encourage them. And I don't think they should have to meet minimum wage requirements. I'm sorry. Again, this is going to be a tough no vote, but by God, I'm going to make it.
A $10,000 fine will crush most businesses, small businesses that exist in Oregon on your main streets across all the rural cities in your districts. To crush a business is not to encourage employment. To crush a business is not to sponsor young people learning how to work, young people taking opportunities. How many of you, as I look around this room, most of you are of an age you probably were delivering newspapers on your bicycle. I remember folding the papers, the rubber band, all in one swift move, loading them into the sack that was on the bicycle handlebars and going down the street and tossing them, trying to avoid the sprinklers. You and I did that and were allowed to do that. How is that no longer legal in the state of Oregon, and maybe a $10,000 fine on top of it? That would crush a business.
Those who are of the opinion the bill should be passed will answer aye as their names are called. Those opposed, no. The clerk will please call the roll.
Taylor. Thatcher. Thatcher. Weber. Woods. Anderson. Bonham. Boquist. Campos. Dembro. Finley. Frederick. Gelser-Bluen. Gerard. Golden. Gorsuch. Hansel. Hayden. Jama. Knope. Lieber. Linthicum. Manning. Meek. Patterson. Przonski. Robinson. Brock-Smith. Solman. Steiner. President Wagner.
Aye.
Voting nay, Boquist, Finley, Gerard, Linthicum, Robinson, Thatcher, 24 ayes.
House Bill 4004A, having received a constitutional majority, is declared passed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. House Bill 1795 deals with youth employment. My bill does three things. First, it removes the provision that a worker's permit is required for improvement or employment of youth 14 and 15 years old and switches that to a parental permission slip. Currently, if your child is between the ages of 14 and 15 and is interested in work, they must obtain a work permit from the state, and then the school district must sign off. This bill moves that responsibility instead to a parent, legal custodian, guardian, or designated guardian. The employer would be required to have a signed parental permission slip for their youth that is 14 or 15 years old and work at their business. The second item it does is it says that the federal government changes the allowed hours for work, that the state of Missouri will follow that. I do not believe that the school district needs to determine if my child is responsible enough to have a job. That is the right and the responsibility of the parent involved with that child.
I wasn't aware that schools did need to sign off on that.
Absolutely. Since 1957, that has been the law.
And what's the age range there?
It is just for 14 and 15-year-olds, and is only during the point when the kids are in school. It does not include the summer.
That seems like kind of a young age to be earning, to be having a job, to me. Is there a reason why this school should not be a part of that?
Again, I didn't say they shouldn't be a part of it. I just don't think it should be required that the school district has to sign off on this in order for that child to get employment. It should be the parent that makes that ultimate decision and not the school district.
Okay, and what's the other piece to the legislation?
The second piece is on the hours. Currently, federal law dictates that they have to be off by 7 p.m. The reason that this was brought to me was from a restaurant in my town that would like them to be able to work till 8 or 9 p.m. So we were going to make that change. When the Department of Labor for Missouri came and talked about this, they said it's already under federal statute. We can't make that change. So we made the wording in this that says if the federal law changes, that the state of Missouri will mirror that.
So this wouldn't take effect. This piece would not take effect unless the federal law were to also change to that. So we would not be out of compliance with federal law.
You are correct.
Two things, if I can.
Sure, please.
The first is, isn't it fascinating that the restaurant owner asked for this because he wants kids to work later?
I'm a little troubled by that, yes.
It doesn't seem like the kid is first in this thoughtful process versus the restaurant owner.
I think we see that pretty frequently in legislation around when it comes to child labor. For instance, the school calendar.
Right.
That argument was that our tourism industry needed
state fair.
They need workers.
Oh, that too. Yes.
They need the high schoolers to work, and if the high schoolers are in school, they won't be able to work. And one of the reasons they need the high schoolers to work is because they can pay them less.
Right. Something we don't talk about on this floor very often is child abuse and the abuse of children in so many different ways. One of the ways I know children can be abused is when they're homeschooled. And
gentlemen, state your point of order.
I believe this bill is on child employment, not homeschool or abuse.
I'm not an expert or anything, but pretty sure that there's a direct correlation between child labor and child abuse since, I don't know, ever. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a bill about parental rights. I'm involved with this issue intimately because my children began to work in Branson, Missouri at age 5. Each one of them began working in a show. They were on stage. They learned about acting. They learned about relating with other people. They began to work at age 5, and to date, all of them in their or near 30s, they each work 2 or 3 different jobs. They're very successful. They have a strong work ethic because they began to work. It was their choice and our choice as parents that they do so at a young age. Our town of Branson, Missouri has 13,000 or so residents, and yet we serve over 10 million visitors per year. We need all hands on deck. If a 14-year-old wants to dip ice cream and put it in a cup, we need them to do that. If they want to bus tables, we need them to do that. All hands on deck. It's a parental choice issue, and it's dealing with the children. They can make those decisions. If they want to work at the track and line up the go-karts, let them do so, because at 63, I don't want to do it. If they want to make some money, go ahead. Thank you. I support the bill 100%. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
So the arguments that have been made by the gentleman from Taney and others regarding the need for employment slots to be filled is well taken. But I would say that there's a bigger issue at stake than even just simply filling slots with people who are willing to work. This is, as has already been stated, a matter of parental not only authority, but parental responsibility. Parents have the responsibility of raising their children to be well-rounded citizens, to operate with a well-developed work ethic when they arrive into adulthood. It is important for children to have opportunity to take responsibility and to apply their hand to the plow, if you will, and to be a part of industry, to be industrious, to work and to labor. There is dignity in all labor that is both ethical and legal, of course. When we have young men and young women that are getting involved in employment at early ages, it is good for them. It's as important for them to be a part of that as it is for them to get a well-rounded education. It takes both work ethic and knowledge and wisdom to be able to be a productive citizen, to be able to take care of, provide for, and protect your family when you arrive into adulthood. I remember when I was a young man, I ended up, I was working in different ways beforehand, but I had my first real paying job when I turned 12. And every day after school, I would roll papers and I would throw a paper route, and I ran that route Monday through Friday after school until I turned 16. And then I got a job at the grocery store as a sacker. And I sacked groceries, and I took those groceries to cars, and I learned what it was. Even prior to that, I learned what it was to be someone who has a well-developed work ethic, which means you learn how to handle frustration. You know how to learn, you learn how to handle people. You know how to do the jobs that no one else wants to do, but you get to do it because, well, it's your job to have to do it. To manage your own impulses, to work and to lean into those moments when you are tired and you don't have interest, but you do it nonetheless because that's what you owe your employer, because your employer is paying your check, right? These are life lessons that are extremely important. This is good for children. It's good for families. It's good for local communities. It's good for our state when we have future generations growing up and learning the value of hard work. This has happened for generations upon generations upon generations. Children have worked beside their parents in the fields in order to help take care of and provide for their families.
As we brought this bill up today, my thoughts went back to my time when I would pass 10-year-olds and 12-year-olds heading to the fields to work. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Ecuador, and I would be headed to school. I'd see the kids put on their work gear and ask them if they could join us that day at school. They would say no, because I got to get to the fields. We fought for this in this country so that kids could go to school and not be forced to work. Looking back at our history of child labor in this country, it was in 1842 when finally in the state of Massachusetts, they were able to limit the workday for children under the age of 12 to 10 hours. For decades and decades, people fought so that kids could be safe, get an education at the time when it's more important than ever. And instead, today we see a rollback of child labor laws in red state after red state, and I thank God that we only have a few days left of session, that we're not going to see the child labor laws rolled back in this state. Here's the situation, folks. This all came about during COVID. when we were faced with labor shortages, and the business industry said, I don't care about the hazardous working conditions, let's roll back these child labor laws and get kids to work. Let me share a story about a kid that died in our state. In June of 2022, William Hampton was killed in Lee Summit. He was killed while working at a recycling park when he was pinned between a semi-truck and a trailer. Take a look. We have a lot of extra time on our hands these days. Do some research about kids who are dying across our country because red states are rolling back child labor laws, putting kids, quite frankly, in harm's way. So today we're talking about 14 and 15-year-olds. What's next? How young is it? How young is too young to work? Well, I got a 10-year-old, and yes, he loves to raise chickens right now. So is it time to send him out on the poultry farm full time? Yeah. What are we doing? This is one of the maddening things that we do in this place is say that we care about kids. Look what happens when kids are spending more time working than in school. If we care about kids, we're going to keep protecting them. Kids have died, kids have been maimed because they're placed in hazardous working conditions. I know there's a lot of chatter, a lot of jokes going on the floor right now, but rarely have I seen from page 4 to page 8, just strick it out. Statutes that have been put in place to keep kids safe because, hey, we need to get them to work. This is sickening. Vote no.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just to speak on the bill.
Proceed, lady.
This is a good bill, and everyone should vote yes for this. But I'm just going to kind of expand here. You know, it seems like the division is great in this room. One side of the aisle versus the other is so obvious. You know, at what point are people going to be self-responsible? Some people seem to think the government is the answer for everything. You know, free food, free health care, free this, free that, free. But it's not free. These young kids need to be taught self-responsibility. And I can tell you my personal story. I started working at age 9. And I continued to work throughout high school when I was 14, 15. And my parents, I wanted to get a driver's license. And they're like, sorry, Cherie, we can't afford to add you to our car insurance, much less a car. And I went to work in Columbia at 15, but my older brother was 17, so we worked the same location. He drove. He was able to buy his own car and pay his own insurance. And my parents were fully supportive, and it didn't affect any grades whatsoever. My parents always asked me, Cherie, how do you get A+? Well, Mom and Dad, you get 100% on your homework, and you do extra credit. And throughout high school, when I was working 12 months out of the year, my high school counselor came to me and said, Cherie, you're bored. You got enough credits. Graduate early. I graduated early out of high school, went to work full-time, working full-time while going to school. It is good for these kids. And you know what these kids of today are? Majority of them are lazy. They don't know what work ethic is. But they know how to play video games all night. They know how to join gangs. They know how to get into trouble. Get a job and be responsible. Vote yes.
Mr. Clerk, please close the board and tally the vote. By your vote of 104 yes, 38 no, you have passed moved the previous question. Gentlemen from St. Charles County, you have 1 minute to close.